Okay, here we are doing another episode of Pot Talk TV. And on Pot Talk TV, I've been pushing for 40 years to free all marijuana prisoners and to stop any more from going in, since we all know that this is a farce and that the government has lied every step of the way in relation to marijuana. And it's really about profiting off the incarceration of our brothers and sisters. And they've been taking children away from parents who smoke a joint. And unfortunately, we don't get any justice in the courts. Any of you people who've been following my court cases, I've showed how criminal the judges are and how they just ignore the Constitution and they ignore Supreme Court rulings. And it don't matter what you say, the prosecutor can. In most cases, I've put in tons and tons of paperwork citing real law, and the prosecutor don't answer it, and then eventually they'll answer it with one little piece of paper saying deny him, and the judge says, oh, I like the prosecutor's idea of denying you, and they just, on my paperwork, they say denied in all aspects, but they don't give any conclusions, any facts or conclusions of law. And a lot of the stuff that I've learned and used in my court case, I've learned from this man sitting next to me. You can go to the two-shot. One of my real teachers here, Rod Class, and it's really great to have you here with me. And
thank you.
You've helped me a lot with my court cases, and I've jammed them up and made some of the judges pretty crazy, shaking in it like crazy people. Your stuff is amazing, and more people should tune into Rod Class. And his stuff is so right on. If more people out there in television land would start learning this stuff and taking on these criminal judges, we could have a change. But the American people really have to wake up and start getting these criminal judges out and get honest judges in. As long as we have criminal judges, the people don't have a chance. So you people out there in television land, just keep electing these criminals over and over and over again. The same judge, the same judge, the same judge every time. And it's time that we change that in America and the people stop voting for all these criminals that are robbing us and jailing us, and everything they can do to us, they're doing. So I would like to actually turn it over to Rod. One of the main things I'd like you to tell my viewers is how they profit on locking up nonviolent individuals, the QSIP, and how they drain our accounts.
What we brought up here on previous videos, what a lot of you people out here don't understand is the bankruptcy of 1933. What type of impact that has on us today. But they also created the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 prior to that, 20 years earlier than the bankruptcy. They created what was known as Federal Reserve notes, and that is something that all of us have in our pockets and we walk around with. We were taught that that's real money. But getting into the legislative acts, getting into the congressional laws, into the statutes at large, we're finding out that Federal Reserve note was for internal use. It was never supposed to be given to the general population. They had to put that in place before they did the bankruptcy of 1933. We're not talking that HJR 192, Public Law 1, under 48 Stat, Chapter 10 on this thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Public Law 1, 48 Stat C1, which was the actual state of emergency. This is where they actually came in and they stripped the American people of its gold and of its silver. And there's a history, and we got into the video on this when we did it. We went back and showed where our government handed over in the neighborhood of roughly about $140 billion in gold to the Federal Reserve between the 1927 and the 1930s. And that stuff was given to Germany. And remember what was going on in Germany in the 1930s. Hitler was in effect at that time. The Federal Reserve crashed our country under the 1929 Wall Street. They crashed this country. It was done deliberately. So it would sit down and cause a panic and have a money shortage. The money shortage was as our government handed over close to $114 billion into the Federal Reserve. They passed the 1933 bankruptcy, stripping you and I, in order to cover the shortage. What they also did in 1935 was create the Social Security Act. And in that Social Security Act, if you get down into sections 501, 502, it sits down and shows you that they put a dollar amount value on every single live birth of $1.8 million. A lot of the Patriot people sit here and talked about that, but nobody would ever produce the documentation. It's sitting in the Social Security Act of 1935. That's where it's sitting at. It's sitting down under section 501, 502. What it goes back and explains, for every live birth, the state would get $1 million every fiscal year.
That's for each one of us.
That's for each one of us. Every fiscal year. They would continually, not just the live birth, but every single year, they would continually roll this thing over. Now, you stop and think right here in New York City. You got 10 million people in New York living. Each one of them was $1 million each.
That's credit.
That's credit.
To the state.
To the state. To that city. How many people do you have in this state? Think about it. 1 million per person per year. Every year. And every time a new live birth comes in, that's another $1 million. Well, granted, you have
$1.8 million when they're first born, and $1 million every year after.
And when the people die, that money still sits in that account. It still sits there. That money still exists. And when they created this, they created the Alien Registration Act of 1940. What that is, that actually created the birth certificate setup where you actually had to have every birth had to be registered with the state. They had to show proof. And part of that proof was that footprint on that birth certificate. Now think about what we're sitting here saying. You, as the American people, were never supposed to have known that they put a dollar value on your life. You go back and read that Social Security Act. We were placed under Secretary of Labor. What is the Secretary of Labor? It's a workforce. It deals with labor management. It deals with the working economy. But see, it also goes back under the Secretary of Commerce, which means work and commerce is what we've placed underneath. But see, that goes one step further. It was also put under Title 25 CFR, which is Indian Affairs, but it's also Department of Interior. Look up Department of Interior. We are a commodity. So you're not only part of the labor, you're also a part of the commercial activities, but you're also listed as a commodity.
That's when they made us cattle.
That's chattel.
Right.
Exactly. They made us chattel. They put a dollar worth. You and I were never supposed to ever figure this out. You and I was never supposed to know this. They handed you Federal Reserve notes, passed it off as what you thought was real money, because granted, yes, you can go down to the store and you can get $20 out and you can buy food, you can buy gas, you can buy whatever you want with that $20 Federal Reserve note, because they are using it as money. But that's really a debt note, because Congressman McFadden stood here and said that that Federal Reserve note was not money. It was a mere promise to pay you someday. A mere promise to pay you someday. This was the issue. is that there was a mere promise to pay. What the system has done, every time they drug us into the courts, every time they tagged us, they had to have our signature, because McFadden stood here and explained that when he used a paraphrase of the Scottish distiller, when he would sell his whiskey to a bootlegger, all the bootlegger had to do was sign his name across the bill. Ladies and gentlemen, you're being brought into a court. We want you to sign this bond. It's a $100,000 bond. $1,000 is an O on your own reconnaissance. You'll come back. Sign the bond for $100,000. The moment you signed that, you turned that $100,000 into $1 million. Why? Because that's 10% of the value. Because they're going to turn around and they're going to sell this. This is where the CRIS account comes in, which is the Court Registry Investment System. What you do, you go in, you sign the bond. The court, through the court administrator, takes it down and sends it into the Federal Reserve. They turn around and they put this out, give it a CUSIP number. They put you out on the stock market through Fidelity, through Dun & Bradstreet. We used to at one time to be able to go into Dun & Bradstreet with any of our court cases, and we could pull up our name and we'd sit here and show that we had a court case. It shows that we was being traded on Dun & Bradstreet. We used to be able to go into Fidelity, and they'd sit here and show that we're being traded on Fidelity. Because we started exposing this, they started hiding it. But we was able to come back and prove that they were trading us on the stock market, which is a commodity. It goes right back into where we're dealing under the Department of Interior as an asset. This is why we're not getting justice in these courts.
And why our prisons, when they fill our prisons with people, a prison is like a warehouse holding commodities that they're making money off of.
Exactly, because what they're doing, and we have the documents, Worldwide Auto Parts. We went back and proved that the auto part company paid the prison $1 million, and they're having prisoners turn around and they're producing generators, alternators, starters, anything that has Worldwide Auto Part written on it, sitting at the parts store, comes from prisoners. They're not being paid regular wages. And according to the labor law, they're supposed to be paid in the same fashion as anybody else out here outside of prison. They're supposed to get equal pay. They're supposed to be getting their retirement, getting Social Security pulled out, getting FDIC pulled out. And the money is supposed to be going to their family as if this was a real job, and they're not getting it. So what they're doing is they're stealing your signature. They're stealing your identity. They're putting you into a workforce, making you work for nothing. And they're capitalizing off everything you turn around and make. And they're capitalizing off your signature and off your sweat. This is our court system. This is our prison system. Ladies and gentlemen, they've got the paperwork on this for Worldwide Auto Parts, and it's going to be hitting their website for you to be able to get in and read and see the tragedy that is involved in all this.
Real shortly, we will have, we're just getting our stuff up on the freedomfirstparty.net. Real soon, we'll have all Rod's paperwork up under Rod Class. We'll put it under his name so you can go see all the documentation that him and his research team have done. And I'd like to add that our prisons are full, and now we have corporate prisons. The big corporations are now making prisons to put more people in, and they're paying our politicians to make more laws. One of the reasons that they haven't relaxed the marijuana laws and a lot of the drug laws and a lot of the laws that are nonviolent, that there's no victim, one of the reasons they haven't lightened these laws is because the big corporate prisons need to make money. So now all these big corporate prisons have financed all the politicians' campaigns. They're putting big money into the politicians to keep the laws stiff, to keep putting more and more people in jail so that the big corporation prisons can make money. That's basically slavery in America for profit. You have a comment on that?
Well, yeah, that comes into human trafficking. That's what we're sitting here talking about. It all goes back in. If American people would understand the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, they would understand the state of emergency of 1933, the Social Security Act, and the Alien Registration Act. If you'd understand them four, there isn't anything that isn't being done against American people that this all doesn't tie into. I read here the other day, if Henry Ford, whenever he created the Ford Company, he says if the American people would ever wake up and they would ever understand the banking system, there would be a revolution the very next day because the people would be so irate of the fraud that's been perpetrated on the American people. Ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what this is coming down to. I sit down and I show Joe and Paula here, and I brought up Title 21, United States Code, under Section 841 that deals with possession and everything that deals with it. Title 21, 841 has been repealed. The judges know it. The lawyers know it. Prosecution knows it. But they don't want to sit down and follow it. Am I a promoter? I am a promoter in justice. If the laws are there and the laws have been repealed, then follow the laws that you've created. Follow the rules and the regulations that you've created. Don't sit here and break your own regulations because it's profitable. Because now the crime that you're committing is now a human travesty. It now comes into human trafficking. That comes into human rights violations and civil rights violations on the American people. This goes against UN. This goes against our principle of this country. We sit down and said the 13th Amendment supposedly, after they got rid of the original one that kept them and banned anybody with title nobility from holding office, the next 13th Amendment was supposed to stop slavery. That was the purpose of the new 13th Amendment, to stop slavery. Ladies and gentlemen, it didn't stop slavery, it has increased it. It has literally increased it.
It made all of us slaves.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's done. It has turned all of us into slaves on this. Yeah. So to sit down for what we're doing, ladies and gentlemen, what we have brought up, you bring up their own statutes, their own codes, their own rules, their own regulations, and remember, you and I are not the ones that wrote this. It was the attorneys. It was the bankers. It's the lawyers. It's the Bar Association. I have researchers that work with me that has actually worked with law firms that's writing the laws up for Congress. These legislators are not writing their own laws. They have a law firm that's writing all this stuff up. They're giving it to their aides. These congressmen are blindly signing this stuff with no knowledge and no clue of what they're signing because they haven't read it, they haven't wrote it, somebody else did, and their aides are coming and says, here, sign this, sign this, sign this, sign this, and they're not reading it. That's one thing you got to remember here, and it's one of the things that we didn't touch on, was the Jefferson's Manual. The Jefferson's Manual was created for legislation to where every single law, including the Obamacare, had to be read 3 times on the floor of Congress. 3 separate times and 3 separate dates. Whether it was 1 page or it's 3,000 pages, they had to read it entirely to all of the congressmen for them to vote on it, not a committee. Obama is not supposed to be writing laws. That's not his job. He is the executive. But yet we are seeing presidents coming up doing legislative work to where they are writing the laws and taking it to Congress and says, here, pass this. I wrote the law. You're not legislative. You stepped outside of your jurisdiction. But when it went through legislation, it's supposed to have been read 3 times. It was supposed to went through the Senate 3 times. They were supposed to read it. It was supposed to went to the president. He had three choices, either yay, nay, or abstain. And they're not doing any of this. None of this is being read. Nobody's following any rules, but you and I are being held to a standard far higher than anything they themselves are holding themselves to. But yet, they come to you and they ask you for work. Put yourself in a position. Here you are, an owner of a store. How would you like it if your employees come up and told you how you're going to run your business, and they sit here and dictated to you of what you're going to give them for a salary, and they're going to dictate to you that if you don't, they're going to have you locked up because you didn't give them what they wanted? How long would you keep that employee? Ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what we're dealing with these judges. That's exactly what we're dealing with these politicians.
And let me add to that. And you people out there in television land, just keep voting these criminals in. That we've got criminals from the top to the bottom in this country. And you say, oh, well, I'm a Republican and I'm going to vote for the Republican. Well, that Republican, all these Republicans are criminals. But then you say, I'm a Democrat and I'm going to vote for the Democrats. Well, all the Democrats are criminals. Our whole system is filled with criminals from the top to the bottom, and all they're doing is shaking you down. They're picking your pockets every chance they get. They're stealing from you. You work for your labor. They're not giving you anything but paper that's not worth anything. When our founding fathers set up this country, they even said Congress was supposed to set up, the money in this country was supposed to be gold, based on gold and silver. When our politicians gave that gold away and accepted paper, and not only did they accept paper, but they accepted paper with interest. That was criminal on the part of our politicians. And every politician since then has gone along with it. And the American people are just getting fleeced every kind of way possible. And you people out there are sheep. You're doing nothing about it. You keep voting these same people in. Take it away, Rod.
Okay, what Joe is sitting here saying is right. But part of the problem we're running into is that the electoral system is so corrupt because the way they're setting it up. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a group of people out here. They're trying to restore the republic. And remember, what Joe sitting here and said, you got Republicans, you got Democrats. Ladies and gentlemen, a Republican and Democrat does not mean a Republican form of government,
right,
and a Democrat means a democracy. The Republican and Democrats both fall under democracy. You've got one form of government with two different names, and that's a deception that's being ran on the American people. There's actually a group out here that's trying to restore the republic, bring it back in. But ladies and gentlemen, we need people like you to wake up and get educated. We need honest people to be able to step up. They want to reinforce the original 13th Amendment of taking anybody that is an esquire or anybody with title of nobility out of office where they cannot hold public office. But in order to restore the republic, in order to bring the government back in under the Declaration of Independence, because it sits there and says, you the people out here. Anytime our government becomes detrimental to us, becomes evil, to where they sit here and they start violating, it is up to you and I to sit here and pull these people out of office. And it doesn't mean on election day. It means that we are to immediately take up arms against these people and bring them out. Am I advocating violence? Absolutely not. But I am sitting here saying this. Part of walking in these courts and sticking together and doing the paperwork through following the paperwork in that we're following, learning the laws, learning the system. Go down to your county commissioners. Go down to your city council. Go down to the administrations and say, look, these are the laws. The more that we stand up, the more that we start pointing this out, and the more we start hammering on these people are not going to want to keep playing with us anymore. But part of the problem is our lack of education. We need knowledge. Our means of sitting down and pulling these people out is knowledge and it's education. It is better to have knowledge at this point. Pen and pencil is more deadly to these people than any type of arms that you can have. Pen and paper and knowledge is more feared by these people. That is what's going to change this country.
I'll add to that. These people, these criminals that are running our country, they want you to get armed and get violent so they can declare martial law and do even worse stuff than what we have now. That's what they've been trying to do. But what we need to do is use the law against these people. When our congressmen, our senators, they swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution. When they make laws that violate that Constitution, when you swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution like a judge, and you violate that oath, you have committed treason. Many of our congressmen and senators, almost all of our judges have committed treason. It's time for the American people to start taking these people out of office and charging them with treason, charging them with crimes against the people. They want us to get violent. I'm against violence. I'm against arms. I'm for the Second Amendment. I'm for the right of the people to bear arms, because if only the police had arms, we'd be in worse shape than we are. But I don't think that an armed revolution is going to be the way that we're going to win it. I think we have to start holding these people responsible for the crimes they've committed against the American people.
All right. This goes right back to what Joe's sitting here saying. These legislators, federal and state, live among us. They do come home on vacations. They do come home from leave. Ladies and gentlemen, we should be pounding on their office door when they come home. We know where they live at. We need to start going to their homes saying, hey, look, what did you do here? Why did you sign the Obamacare? Why did you sign the right to take away our arms?
Right.
We need to be going to these people. We need to be going to their office.
Why did you violate the Constitution?
Exactly. We need to be going to their homes.
What if they call you stalkers?
No, they work for us. We should have access to them. You should be able to talk to any of your politicians. You should be able to talk to any of your judges. They are employees of we the people. They are not lords over us. That's what the American people need to start reminding them. You work for us. You're not a lord. The judge, your honor. There's not supposed to be honors in America if you really read the Constitution. And the lawyers are all, Esquire?
Yes.
There's not supposed to be esquires. In England, esquire was like just under a lord, which is a title of nobility, position of authority. They're employees. They're not honor. They're not esquire. They've given themselves title to rule over us. It's time for the American people to say, wait a minute. The Constitution says no titles of nobility. It's time for you people to start upholding the law, to start being loyal to the Constitution. When you're not loyal to the Constitution, you are committing treason, and we're going to hold you responsible for it.
This is why they don't want us to know where the judges live at. They really don't want us to know where the police officers live at. The lawyers are keeping everything. All these public officials are pulling their names out of the phone book, and they have all their names suppressed with secrecy. They don't want you to know where they live. Why? Because they don't want us coming to their house. Ladies and gentlemen, this should not be the case. These are public officials. Anytime we have an issue, we ought to be able to go knock on their door and say, hey, we have an issue here.
The right to redress of grievances.
Exactly right. And not sitting in a courtroom and not sitting in a public office. If they don't want to address us here properly, then we ought to be able to go to their homes and sit down and say, look, we have an issue with you. Now, we got a group of people here. This isn't stalking. The bottom line boils down to We don't like the way that you're operating your courtroom against us. We're here to sit down. Let's do the Christian thing. What does the Bible sit here and tell you? When you have a problem, you go to your brother and you sit down and you talk to him. If one don't work, then you bring in several. Then you bring in several more. And this is the whole point here, ladies and gentlemen. We should be able to go in and say, hey, isn't these the laws, Judge? Isn't this your regulations? Aren't these your duties? Isn't this how it's supposed to be done? If you don't want to follow it, then get off the bench.
Right.
Get off the bench. Quit your job. I don't want to hear, well, you guys don't understand that we have somebody above us from the Vatican or from England, and we got a gun pointed to our heads, and if we don't sit here and do what they want, they're going to shoot us. Then quit your job.
And if you take orders from the Vatican or you take orders from England, you're committing treason.
Exactly.
Hold their feet to the fire.
This is things that we, the people, ought to be able to sit down and do. And it can be done peacefully with these people.
Right.
We could sit down and confront them and sit down and say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this. Why, when I came into the courtroom, I laid the laws down before you. I sat back and showed you where the laws were repealed. Why did you override this? Why is not the prosecutor answering my paperwork? We ought to be able to go to that prosecutor and say, hey, didn't I put paperwork in before you? Yes. Why didn't you answer it? Well, I don't have to. Yes, you do. If I have to answer your paperwork, then you have to answer mine. Well, if I answer your paperwork, then I have to admit that I'm committing a crime, and I don't want to have to admit that I'm actually committing a crime, so it's better for me to remain silent, and I got the judge up there to have your paperwork dismissed on the foundation that it's frivolous and unintelligible under 12b-6. Well, what's 12b-6 mean? Well, 12b-6 is something we just turn around and use as a convenient way to throw out your paperwork. That's exactly what it is.
Right.
It's a convenient way of throwing out your paperwork. What we have found here, part of your 12b-6 is they're telling you you did not exhaust your administrative remedies in this court case. Well, wait a minute. If I'm bringing charges against you, then I have to exhaust my administrative remedies. You didn't exhaust your administrative remedies, so why am I getting the 12b-6 whenever you didn't exhaust your administrative remedies? That 12b-6, ladies and gentlemen, that they're doing is nothing more than an escape clause to dodge your paperwork. And I have, with some of the paperwork that I have done, I have had lawyers and I had judges and I've had other officials that have looked at my paperwork. And some of the comments have come back in, especially on that Coram Nobis paperwork that I did in 2008.
Which I put in my cases.
Yep. It's a 4-page document.
And they ignore.
It went back in. I had a college professor call me from California the moment I created this. It was on the web no more than a week. And I got one of his students put it in, and he called me. And I laid out the whole explanation of that Coram Nobis paperwork. It went back in and showed that the court system is operating under a foreign state because these people relinquished their national citizenship. They handed it over. These people expatriated. They took an oath to the Constitution and then expatriated. We went back and showed if you're going to bring me in the all caps as a corporation, then you had to run me through Washington, D.C., through the Secretary of State, to where you had to bring me in under foreign sovereign immunity. I've had several judges that come back and said, you're absolutely right. But this law professor said, Rod, you explained the entire corruption of the court system, of everything they did wrong in that 4-page document. But if you take away the proof of service and the title that brought me into 1 page, you take away the 2 pages of definition that left me 1 page, and basically in 1 page I exposed the entire corruption of the entire court system. And that's exactly what that law professor told me. And we've had judges sit back and say, you were never supposed to have figured this out.
And when I turned that in my case, that the Coram Nobis and the Coram Nobis addendum, they just completely ignore it. They just, the prosecutor doesn't answer it, and then the judge just turns around and don't answer it, and they move along. Now, in court, if you put in paperwork, they're supposed to answer your paperwork. And I know from all the times I've been in court, if the prosecutor accuses you of something in his paperwork and you don't dispute his paperwork, then it stands as fact on the record. But if you put in paperwork that the prosecutor don't answer, it's supposed to stand as fact on the record, but instead it's ignored by the prosecutor and the judges. That shows that our court system is completely corrupt and completely criminal, and there's no chance for a person to get a fair trial in the courts today. It's up to the American people. The first thing we have to do, if we're going to fix this country, the first thing we have to do is take back our courts. Because without a legal remedy, we have no remedy other than a revolution. And a revolution, how can we have a revolution? They got drones over America right now. There's no way we can beat them in an armed revolution. And even if we did have an armed revolution, who are we fighting but other Americans? I have no fight with the American soldiers. I have no fight with the police, even though I think that the police are a bunch of robots who follow the law and help to violate the rights. But they're Americans to me. I don't want to go against any of those people. I don't want a revolution in this country. I want to take the criminals off the bench, the criminals out of office, and put in honest people where we're going to get justice and we're going to get the Republican form of government that the founding fathers set up.
All right, let's go back with what Joe's sitting here saying. All right. We're not saying that there's no laws here. Let's understand that. We're not saying that there's no laws. If there is a rape victim, if there is a murder victim, hit and run, ladies and gentlemen, these are crimes.
Right, there's a victim.
There's a victim. Let's bring the victim in and have the state represent the victim, the real victim, not the state of, the real victim. That's part of the job. Because the thing of it is, if you and I, now think about what I'm going to tell you, because I've done this. I filed paperwork into the Attorney General's office. You know what they told me? I don't have any obligation to you to represent you. My job is to represent only public officials and the public office. That's my job. My job is to deal with them. Well, if your job is to deal with them, then you can't prosecute me. If you cannot represent me, you cannot prosecute me. If you cannot bring me in as a victim and represent me in court, then you cannot sit here and use a fictitious entity that's claiming to be a victim and drag me in and start prosecuting me. This is where the problem lies.
Let me add to that. The fictitious victim he's talking about is when they say the people of the state of so-and-so is charging you with a crime. But there's no victim other than the people of the state of, which is a fiction. A fiction.
Okay. Now the problem, even with that, Joe. All right, let's bring Paula, and let's bring a bunch of other people in and put them on the witness stand. Have you been injured by me? Are you people of New York? Yes. Have you been injured by me? Well, no. So what they brought in, the people of, has just now been proven the people wasn't even injured.
In my cases, I tell them, if the people are charging me, bring in these people. I have a right to question them on the stand. If the people of the state of New York are charging me with a crime, put the two people on the stand because I have a right to face my accusers.
Exactly. And if you don't want to bring them in, I'll bring the people in.
Yeah.
And I'll sit here and ask them.
Right.
I'll subpoena them in. And I'll sit here and ask them, have I harmed you? Well, if they sit back and say no, then the people of New York wasn't harmed. So that means you brought a false charge against me using people that doesn't exist because these people said they've never been harmed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's as stupid as what this sounds. It's the truth of the matter.
Right.
There is no real injured party. It all goes back into they want your signature on a bond so they can sit down and put a QSEP number on it so they can run it through the court registry investment system, put it through Fidelity, put it through Dun & Bradstreet, put it through any other insurance company in order to securitize and make profit off of your name and off your signature. There's never been a real victim in any of this. That's our problem with our system. These people don't want to live off of a paycheck which they're being paid. You and I are required to be able to meet our means off of our working paycheck. We don't have the luxury of embezzling and swindling federal funding off the Highway Safety Act, off of Social Security Act, off of all these other things that's coming in that the state and the federal government gives you federal grants for. And then they turn around, instead of using it for the community, they put it into their retirement called the CAFR account. And there are billions and billions and billions of dollars sitting in the CAFR account. And the counties will sit here and say, oh, we're broke, we're bankrupt. But yet they got all this money sitting in this separate account for their retirement and for their slush fund for them to go out and take vacations, go have parties, go sit down and pull a group of people together and just go to Hawaii. And that's where the money's coming out of that CAFR account. But yet they don't have the money to sit down for education for the schools. They don't have the money for what you're doing here in Woodstock. You got $80,000 that was given by Warner Brothers?
Time Warner.
Time Warner?
Right. It was supposed to go to
$80,000 for this public broadcast setup.
No, not this one. This one's private. This one's ours.
Yeah.
But in the town of Woodstock, Time Warner gives, and in almost all of these towns, in order for Time Warner or any of these cable companies to have access to the streets to use what's public, they have to give some back to the community. And they give money to the public access. Now what happens here, they give $80,000 to the town of Woodstock for public access, and then the town of Woodstock gives $5,000 to the actual public access station, and they put 75 in, what is it called again, the account?
It's a private account.
Oh, the general fund.
Oh, they put it in the general fund.
Offset taxes, property.
Right. They say to offset property taxes, yet property taxes go up every year anyway.
Now, wait a minute. Now, didn't we just sit here and talk about the Federal Reserve Act of the Federal Reserve not being worthless, and the state of emergency taking your gold and silver, and they put a price tag on your birth, and they give you a birth certificate? Ladies and gentlemen, why do you even have property taxes? Because the state is getting $1 million per person per year. Should that not have paid your property taxes and everything else that went with it? This is what's supposed to be paying your loans. See, we're overlooking the obvious here. We talk about, well, we got taxes for this, taxes for the other thing. Wait a minute. If you go back and understand the Federal Reserve Act, State of Emergency, Social Security Act, Alien Registration Act, ladies and gentlemen, this takes care of your IRS problems. This takes care of your tax problems. This takes care of all your federal funding, because there's no way, if we were running under a constitutional form of government, there's no way that the city should be spending the money that the way they're spending. But remember something here, and this is how they got around it. As you come into these towns, what's that little sign that says when you come into town?
Incorporated. Incorporated.
That means that is a business. We were taught, well, it just means that they incorporated the community. That isn't what they did.
No, it's for profit.
It's exactly. It's just like going into Ford. It's like going into Microsoft. It's going into GE. It's a corporation. It is a business.
And that business out there in America is the business of picking your pockets.
So if they're going to run a corporation with CEOs, then why on November 2nd are we electing public officials for a corporation that we're not getting paid from? Because they're sitting here saying, oh, well, you're a resident. You live within the corporation. Well, that means I'm an employee. If I'm an employee, I better be getting a paycheck.
What about the town of versus the village of? Are they incorporating twice?
Yeah, they incorporated all town,
Same
county.
venue and then different.
They're all incorporated. Town, county, state,
No, but what about,
federal.
What
It's
about
all.
what about the town of and then the village of?
Is it the same?
Sometimes they are.
Okay. The moment they do, you got Woodstock. But when you come in, does it say incorporated? when you come in?
It actually doesn't say it on Woodstock, but Woodstock is incorporated. It don't
All right.
say it on the...
Now, that means they have to have a charter.
Right.
If they have a charter, then that charter is the rules and regulations and the guidelines for how Woodstock's supposed to operate.
Runs. Right.
So now you need to go down and get the charter and see what the charter like regulations is for running this town and see if they're in violation of their charter. And if they are in violation, you pull the charter.
Right. Wow. We're working on it.
But ladies and gentlemen, these are the things that were overlooked because we've never been educated, we've never been brought up in this here area. And through my experience of what I've been doing on internet radio, on talkshoe.com, on AIB radio, and that ID is 48361. Get into it, look up my name, Rod Klass. I'm all over it. But because of the researchers like Jeanette and Harvey and Carl Weston and so many of these other people that we have, and then the ones that send documents in, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we're sitting where we're sitting at. The knowledge that is out here, that across this country, it's vast. It's a lot of knowledge out here. We're sharing information. But if this town is incorporated, it has to have a charter. If it has a charter, then it has rules and regulations. And it tells you who is in charge. If you've got a charter and you're in charge, then there's no such thing as an election by the people on November 2nd. You can't have this both ways. This is the scam that's been ran on the American people. What they're doing is they're coming in getting the federal funding under the political subdivision, but then the corporation side is embezzling it and putting it into their trust. If they're going to do that, then they have to have an IRS form, a W-9, showing the difference between the corporation. And they don't ever file that extra W-9 to embezzle the money. So it's now embezzlement on their side of the fence.
And what he's saying is going on in all the different towns and communities and counties all over this country.
Exactly.
And if 10 or 20 people stood up and did what Rod is doing, what I'm doing in every community, we could bring about a big change. It ain't going to take the mass of people because most of the people are going to be sheep and they're going to be herded. We just need a good percentage. 10% of people could change this country. When the founding fathers fought the revolution, very few people actually fought in this country. Half of the people were loyal to the king. A big percentage of the other people said, I'm not going to get involved, it's not my problem. And very few people
3%.
And very few people said, you know what? I'm tired of this shit and I'm not putting up with it no more. And that's what we need in this country. More people to say, I'm tired of it, get educated, and start taking on these criminals.
What I've done throughout the years, I've learned how to come back and sue them. I've learned a lot of mistakes, but it wasn't really mistakes because I followed their own pattern of how they did us to go do them. And every time I get something coming back saying, oh, well, this is wrong. Now, wait a minute. This comes back and proves if what you tell me is wrong, then that tells me what you're doing is wrong because I learned it off of you.
Right.
I learned it off of you. So it comes back in is you can't dismiss mine without dismissing your other side for what you're doing to us. And this is one of the biggest things that I have learned throughout the years. I've learned to come back in and go play with these people. It has become a sport. And what this is, ladies and gentlemen, in all reality, it's a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of wits. Now, I've only got a 12th grade education.
I've only got a 6th grade education, and I kick their ass. I blow their mind when I go into court. If I can do it, you people out there can do it.
And that's the same with me. I got a degree in auto mechanics. I've been a welder. I've been a carpenter. I've been cabinet maker. Since 2001, I started into law. And since that time period, I have gotten well educated. I have gotten well adversed. I've learned how to research. But ladies and gentlemen, it takes knowledge on our side. You know, in the last segment with Paula, the question come up was my ability to stand up. when you have the right paperwork in your hands and you know these are the laws, these are what is written, and you walk into that courtroom and you lay him down before that judge and he just drops his head, you know you got him beat. But he sits here and overrides the very laws that he charged you with, and you proved what he charged you with was bogus because they took it out of context. They misused them.
The intent of the law.
Exactly. They used under color of law. My ability and my attitude is because I know I'm right, because I got the resource from them. It's their books. It's their rules. They wrote it. It's their regulations. It's their guidelines. It's what they prescribed. And when I'm walking in there with their books and their procedure, and I go head to head with them, and that prosecutor or that attorney general sits here and shakes, and that judge sits here and shakes, and that judge sits here and drops his head and shakes his head because I'm quoting verbatim what's out of their books.
But the problem, I agree with what you're saying. I've hit them with the real law and the Constitution, right from the Constitution, right from Supreme Court rulings, and they'll find some little tiny statute, and the judges rule from the bench. They make law from the bench. In fact, most judges these days prosecute from the bench. In my case, the prosecutor hardly said anything and kept talking. The judge kept fighting and fighting and fighting, and I said, well, the prosecutor this and the prosecutor that, and the prosecutor even said I didn't say anything, and I said that's right. The judge is prosecuting. Your Honor, are prosecuting from the bench. He hasn't said anything, and the judge just keeps on, and yet they rule against me. It's crazy.
Well, again, this goes back in. This is the amount of corruption that we're dealing with. This is what we're facing, and it comes down to it's going to take the American people to start standing up. In this case, we need to be able to find where their homes. We need to go out and have a visit with them and have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
That's really what it boils down to.
Or people, right, go to your town meetings in mass and go to your courts in mass. If you know, most of the time someone's going to court and you people will sit there and say, oh, ain't it a shame he's going to court? But it's not my problem. But it is your problem. Because when they violate the Constitution and they violate one person's rights, they violate all our rights.
Exactly.
And if you let them take this little bum that's on the street or this wino that's on the street, if you let him take his rights, you've given up some of your own rights. And if people went in mass, that's one of the things that I've been lucky when I go to court. Quite a few people come to court with me. And what it gives me, when the judge sees, and I bring them in with yellow pads taking notes, and the judge sees people taking notes, that makes them very nervous. Those nice yellow pads, if you bring 20 people into court and they all got those pads and they're writing down, well, the judge said this, and Joe said this, and the prosecutor said this, now you have a record, because when you go in, when you try to appeal, if you try to get the transcripts from them, you can't get all the transcripts, and when you get the transcripts, they're altered. We have transcripts at my house. I can prove what I'm saying. They alter the transcripts. But if you walk in with 20 people and they're taking notes, now the judge is very nervous, and it's very hard for them to change the transcripts, because you can bring witnesses in to say, no, this wasn't what was said, this was what was said. If the American people would stick together, and when there's 20 people in court and the judge knows that those people are there, the judge can't just shut you up and not let you speak. So many times, and I've been in a court with friends where they've tried to speak in their own defense, in their own trial, and the judge say, you can't say nothing, or you got a lawyer, or I'm not going to allow that. And even if they don't have a lawyer, the judge will say, well, I'm not going to allow you to say that. I'm not going to allow you to say anything. In a trial, if you're on trial, you should be allowed to say anything. Except, you don't go into court and say, fuck you, Your Honor. That's not the way to do it. But if you're citing law and you're citing real stuff, and you're not being disrespectful, you should be allowed to say whatever you have to say. Yet the judge will tell you you can't say that because he don't want it on the record. He'll keep you from saying stuff to keep it off the record. So if you appeal, there's no record of that appeal. There's no record of you arguing that. You can't appeal anything that you haven't argued in the lower court.
That's exactly right. And it also comes back up. The judge will tell you, well, we'll address this at a later date. We'll sit down
and then they never address it.
And they never address it. And that's where you never get it on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is another reason why. If you've got notaries, if you can bring a notary in with you, that's a state official.
Right.
Bring a notary in. You have the ability to get your own stenographer. A court stenographer that you bring in.
Yeah, but most people can't afford that. I agree. If you got money and you can afford it, do it.
Well, if you got people that's working with you, usually it's like $100 for an hour.
Yeah.
All right. Then turn around and have them come in. These are options. But if you got notaries, a notary can walk in because he's a state official. That notary, you can put him up on a witness stand, and because he can sit here and certify. He can certify whatever laws and totally contradict that judge and what's going on in that courtroom. These are options that we have that we can come back and play with because a notary can certify anything in law. That's something to think about. But also, what we've said here, we talked here earlier, is that if you can bring a doctor in with you, someone that you know is willing to come in, that is a medical doctor, that medical doctor can turn right around and that judge and write him up because he's stressed out and have him taken off the bench and have him evaluated for his ability. These are other avenues.
Right.
Because we've had people on the call line that has brought doctors in, and a doctor sit here and got to a consultation with a judge, and he told that judge, says, obviously you forgot that I am a doctor. And that judge apologized to him because he knew that doctor could have him pulled off the bench and file a report against him and sit down and have him disbarred and have him locked up in an insane asylum.
Okay, unfortunately, we have to cut it quick because this show's over, and it's always too short when I'm with Rod. I would love to have a much longer show and do many more shows. Hopefully in the future we'll do more shows, but this is Joe Barton for Pot Talk TV saying goodbye, and get educated, American people out there, and take on these criminals. Have a good night.